We will not receive even one Muslim. That's the view of my guest today, who speaks on behalf of the recently re-elected nationalist Polish government. I'll ask him if he's defending a racist immigration policy. Dominic Tarczyński, thank you for joining me on Upfront. You're an MP and an MEP-elect for Poland's Law and Justice Party, which was recently re-elected to government and which is often criticised for being anti-immigrant, anti-refugee. But actually, you're not anti-immigrant or anti-refugee. You're OK with white Christian immigrants from Ukraine. You've taken around 2 million of them in. You're just not OK, it seems, with brown Muslim refugees from the Middle East. White people fine, brown people not fine. There's a word for that, isn't there, Dominic?
Good evening. Thank you for having me. It has nothing to do with your color. It has nothing to do with the religion. I keep repeating it for the last 4 or 5 years. It's all about safety and the common sense. It's not about Ukrainians who are allowed to come to Poland. It's about illegal migrants who want to cross our borders. And if you're brown, white, yellow, or whatever, if you want to cross our border illegally, you're not allowed. We are reacting.
Well, first of all, plenty of people are coming into Europe legally as asylum seekers. You have a legal right to asylum from places like Syria. But you say it's not about religion. You said, quote, we will not receive even one Muslim because this is what we promised. You didn't say illegal immigrants. You said we will not receive even one Muslim.
It has nothing to do with the Muslim religion. It's not Islamophobia, as someone's trying to tell us. It's all about this moment and this fact that at 2015, Angela Merkel started this madness, and now this is a problem about Muslims mainly coming to Europe. I'm surprised they are not going to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, or any other rich Muslim countries. They would feel much better, isn't it?
You say Angela Merkel and her madness. I mean, Angela Merkel followed the law. The EU has law. There's a refugee convention. There's a universal declaration of human rights. The EU Advocate General, which advises the European Court of Justice, found this week that your country broke EU law in 2015 when Poland refused to share the refugee burden. So it's your country, your government, Dominic, that's undermining European values, European laws, not immigrants, not refugees, not Muslims.
No, not at all. This judgment was not about Poland only. It was about Hungary and others. And also, this judgment, this sentence, was about all countries which did not fulfill the expectations. You have to remember that the quota system, which failed, was very clear about the numbers. So even Germany and France did not receive as many as they should. For us, that was very clear. In 2015, we promised that we will never agree for the quota system, and our promises are kept. The whole migration crisis, it's a global thing. Europe is not responsible for what is happening in Syria. Poland is not responsible for what is happening in Iraq, in Syria, in other places. We never had any colonies. So if this problem is a global problem, where is Saudi Arabia? Where is Qatar? Where are the other Arab countries, rich Arab countries, which should help? They can help. Mecca is a great example. 100,000 tents used only once a year during the pilgrimage. 4 million people can take this shelter and live there for a year. They're empty. Nice, beautiful tents, air-conditioned tents. They are empty.
Well, you do realise that Lebanon has taken in, tiny Lebanon's taken in over 1 million Syrians. 1 in 5 of the population in Lebanon is a refugee. Turkey has more Syrian refugees than any country in the world. So Muslim majority countries, some are doing their part, some aren't. I agree with you. You also say in other interviews that this is about Christian culture. This is about Europe being Christian. Now you tell me, no, it's all about legality. I feel like you're all over the place. Are you objecting to refugees from Syria because they're not Christian or because they shouldn't be in Poland? Which one? You seem to offer different excuses at different times.
You have to apply. Polish law is very clear about it. Submit your documents, apply for a visa, get us the criminal back check, and then we're going to decide. We are not forced by any law to agree for that. It's the same in America. Even if you have a visa and you're trying to enter US, you still might say, hear, no, you're not allowed, and there's no explanation. No one from U.S. side, they don't have to really explain it.
That might
they
make
don't have
some
to
sense.
Say why you're not allowed.
That might make some sense if you said, if you hadn't said, we will not receive even one Muslim. If you hadn't bragged about the fact that you don't have mosques in Poland. I mean, it sounds like you don't want them there because you're anti-Muslim and anti-Islam.
Okay, so let me go from the legal path to the society. So legally, you have to apply, and legally, you're allowed to apply, and this is up to us if we agree to have you in Poland. That's number one. Then our society, our structure. I keep repeating that in many mosques, we can hear about hijrah. For us, homogenic society, Christian society is a value. For me, multicultural society, it's not a value. I used to live in London. I used to live there for 5 years. I used to work in US, and I see the fruits of multiculturalism. For me, it's not a virtue. For me, it's not a value. So we have a right to think about our future in a way we want to. So Christian culture, Roman law, Greek philosophers, these are the virtues for us.
It's funny that you mentioned. It's funny that you mentioned. Can I jump in 1 second?
Want Sharia law in Europe.
Okay,
I am the member. Let me finish.
Having Muslims in your country doesn't mean you have Sharia law. You mentioned London. The mayor of London is a Muslim. There's no Sharia law. Let me ask you this. You mentioned London. Some would say it's hypocritical that you don't want Muslims in Poland because hold on, let me finish my question.
Where the Sharia is present.
Let me finish a question. Let me finish the question. Many would say it's hypocritical that you say you don't want Muslim immigrants in your country because they commit crimes, there's a security threat, and yet you hear exactly the same rhetoric about Polish immigrants in the UK from right-wing politicians and media there. They say the Poles are groping women, they're feckless, they're criminals, they won't integrate. Don't you see the irony or the hypocrisy of treating Muslim immigrants to Poland in the same way that some Britons treat Polish immigrants?
Okay, how many Poles blow themselves up in London or any other place in the world? That's the question I keep repeating.
There is a lot of crime carried out by Polish immigrants, according to the right-wing press.
Killed themselves and others because of their religion or hate.
Dominic, your argument doesn't work. Just last month in the UK...
The question was very specific.
I'm answering your question.
How many of them blowed themselves up?
Okay. Let me answer your question in this way. A Polish immigrant was charged with the rape and murder of a British student last month. How would you feel if people in the UK started saying, we don't want Poles here anymore. We don't want rapists and murderers here. That's what you say about Muslims. You generalise about all Muslims in the same way that some on the right in the UK generalise about Poles. There's a lot of anti-Polish racism in the UK. Do you not see the irony that you're doing the same thing to Muslims as is done to Poles?
No. No. First of all, if anyone committing a crime should be jailed. It doesn't matter. Is it Polish, is it English, or anyone else? That's number one. Crimes which you mentioned are not committed in the name of Allah.
What's that got to do with
Polish side?
I thought we were talking about security.
Of Christ.
Who cares?
They are just criminals.
We're talking about security threats. But why not?
That's number one.
Why not generalise? Why shouldn't British people generalise about Poles? You're generalising about Muslims. Not all Muslims are terrorists, as you know.
But most terrorists are Muslims.
That's not true, as you know. In fact, that's not actually true. Most of the far-right terrorist attacks in the US this year were from far-right Christians.
If they committed a crime, they should be...
It's funny you say most terrorists are Muslim. This year, one of the worst terrorist attacks that we saw was in New Zealand.
Not Christians,
carried out,
mostly non-believers.
One of the worst terrorist attacks this year, one of the most high-profile, was the murder of more than 50 Muslims in New Zealand by a Christian far-right white supremacist.
Yeah, and he's jailed. That's it.
So what? So Muslims are jailed as well? What's your point? Should I blame all white Christians for what that man in New Zealand did?
My point is that the difference between our reaction after the New Zealand was condemnation. I do condemn that, everyone condemning it. After the terror attacks, we can hear from imams. That's the reaction.
That's not true,
happy,
as you know.
and they want to kill all the infidels.
So that's a lie,
the difference
Dominic.
between
that's
Western civilization.
Imams across the world did not applaud terrorist attacks.
You can just Google it. Just Google it.
Okay, you can Google also the Charlie Hebdo attacks.
Okay, you say this is a lie.
It is a lie to say all imams applaud.
News, I can tell.
Okay, let me ask you this question.
You've got hate preachers.
There are hate preachers,
indeed.
indeed.
Means?
That's not all imams, though. You said all imams clapping. Let me ask you this, Dominic. After the Charlie Hebdo attacks, you had the King of Jordan...
There you go. You don't have hate preachers in the Christian churches.
That's not true either. After the Charlie Hebdo attacks, you had the King of Jordan, the Prime Minister of Turkey, the Foreign Minister of Egypt, the President of the Palestinian Authority, numerous leaders from the Muslim-majority world literally marched through the streets of Paris in solidarity with the non-Muslim victims of those attacks. I don't remember seeing you or any other member of the Polish government marching in Christchurch, New Zealand, in solidarity with the Muslim victims
this
of that attack.
solidarity.
I don't remember seeing you marching in Christchurch.
All this solidarity, candles, and all this painting on the floor, it's a joke.
But where was
we
yours?
We don't need this kind
where
of
was your march? I don't remember seeing your march in New Zealand.
Real action.
Dominic, I don't remember seeing you and the Polish government marching in New Zealand. Answer that. Why didn't you do what Muslim leaders did and march in Christchurch? No,
we don't
I'm asking.
need marches. We have our borders, which are safe.
That's got nothing to do with the question. A Christian far-right nationalist carried out an attack in New Zealand. If you're saying Muslims should condemn a Muslim attack, which they did, why didn't you go to New Zealand and condemn that attack? Why didn't you march like Muslim leaders did in Paris? Why didn't you march in Christchurch?
If you think that these Muslims, these preachers, these imams are so peaceful, let them go to Saudi Arabia, let them go to Qatar. If you want to be a refugee, you have to flee to the first safe country, neighbor country. Then you have to apply, you have to prove who you are. And now we are having people in Europe, Poland is not a neighbor of Syria, without documents or with 5 passports, the same picture and different names. That's just a fact from our interior ministers. So it's all about safety. You are trying to put the whole subject in a box of Islamophobia. Even if no believer will gonna come, or Buddhist, we will not let him in if he's illegal. That's it.
Let me go back to my question, which you avoided answering. The Christchurch shooter was an immigrant. He was a Christian. He was a white nationalist who killed Muslims. And he had on his weaponry references to a battle in which a king of Poland defeated Muslim invaders. He had the name of a Polish military commander on one of his weapons. So I ask again, why didn't you, according to your own logic, go to Christchurch and disown him? Say this has nothing to do with us, nothing to do with Poland or Christianity. That's what you expect of Muslims. Why didn't you do that in New Zealand? I ask again.
Well, thank you very much. Thank God for King Sobieski. He stopped Muslims in Vienna. Thank God for King Sobieski.
That's what the terrorists said as well, by the way.
But I'm not going to react on any idiot who is trying to use our king and beautiful history for a terror attack.
And why can't Muslims say the same? Do you not see the illogic of your position?
If not King Sobieski,
you're basically
Muslims
saying what every Muslim says about Muslim terrorist attacks.
Invited them. Not at all.
Okay. I got to ask the question, though, and I want to talk about the broader cultural point, because you have said in a previous interview this is about culture. This is about preserving Christian culture in Europe. I'm saying to you, white supremacists have carried out horrific terrorist attacks this year in El Paso, Texas, San Diego, California, Christchurch, New Zealand. And they have talked about stopping mosques, stopping the invasion of Muslims, protecting Christian culture. It's virtually the same language that is used by your party and by you. There is an overlap. We can see that with our eyes. It's the same rhetoric.
No, the difference is we are not shooting. If someone is a terrorist or killer or a criminal, should be jailed.
You're not shooting, but are you inciting the violence by using that rhetoric of invasions and stopping mosques?
Do not compare me to the criminal.
I'm comparing your rhetoric, not you. I'm saying the rhetoric is similar, is it not? Or are you denying that? It sounds like you're agreeing.
First of all, as I said, it's against our law. That's number one. It's against our culture. And the culture is very important. As I told you, we are a Christian country. We don't want Hijra in Poland. We don't want Poland being taken over by Muslims, Buddhists, or someone else. For us, Christianity as identity, as our DNA, is very important. And our government has the right to say no. And no one will ever force us to take Muslims, Buddhists, non-believers in huge numbers. But we are helping by sending money, because our government is very straight. We have to help in the place of the conflict, in Syria, in Iraq. That's it. Do not force us to do things which our society doesn't want. That's why our government was elected. That's why we have won.
Dominic Tarczynski, thanks for joining me on Upfront. Another year, another controversy about the veil in France. After a mother was verbally abused by a far-right politician during her son's school visit to a regional assembly, the debate over the veil, Islam and secularism in France has kicked off once again, with one journalist even comparing the hijab to a Nazi uniform. So is this really about head coverings or secularism? Or given the recent attack on a mosque in France by a former member of Marine Le Pen's far-right party, is this really about French Muslims being constantly demonized as some sort of enemy within? Joining me to debate this are Reem Sarah Alouane, an international human rights researcher focusing on religious freedom and civil liberties, and Benjamin Haddad, a director at the Atlantic Council and the former DC representative of President Emmanuel Macron's presidential campaign. Thank you both for joining me in the arena. Reem, when you heard the president of this regional assembly, who belongs to Marine Le Pen's far-right party, when you heard of this verbal attack that he made on a Muslim mother wearing a hijab on a school trip, accompanying her kid, demanding she take it off in the name of French secularism, before he and others from his party stormed out of the chamber, what was your reaction? How surprised were you?
I was not surprised, but at the same time, I realized that we have again, and maybe even more, reach a point of no return. When you see the reaction of this person and how we amplify a problem that actually is not really a problem, when I saw this kid crying, this mother was with her kid.
Yeah, her son wept on camera.
Yeah, her son was there. She was just literally giving her free time to help our understaffed, underpaid teacher to go with kids and helping the staff.
Yeah.
And being treated that way, my first reaction was, this is getting worse. Where are we going? This is not my country.
It's getting worse, says Reem. The council president's actions, Benjamin, led to widespread condemnation in France. Would you add your voice to those condemnations?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, this is a humiliation of a woman who, exactly as Reem said, was accompanying her kid to school, giving her free time to public school. This is actually a sign of integration in a way. It's participating to the life of the community. So I think on this, there's widespread agreement that she should not have been treated this way. President Macron actually said it was humiliating. His spokesperson said it was a shame on the Republic. So there is
But his education minister, who did condemn the abuse, then went on to say, it's not forbidden by the law, but the headscarf is not desirable in our society. It's as simple as that. How does that mother supposed to feel when the education minister comes out and says that, has a kind of yes, but response?
So this is a very complicated question.
Yeah.
So, there's a few things. I mean, first in France, you have a tradition of secularism and separation, strict separation of church and state that's been reinforced by a law 15 years ago saying that no ostentatious sign, religious sign should be admitted within the public service, within the school, within a city hall, for example. And that goes for the hijab, but also for a kippah, for a visible cross. And, this goes back to a long tradition in France that actually is mostly about the Catholic Church than Muslims.
This is not Muslims being singled out in your view?
It is not, but it is true that we have a hard time having a rational debate about this. And I regret the fact that each time you have these controversies that are singled out.
Do Muslims in France feel singled out by this secularism argument?
Absolutely, and the irony is, Muslims only want laïcité to be applied. As in, laïcité is here to protect religious freedom. But we are witnessing a transformation of laïcité into a legal monster that it was not aimed to be when the law was implemented. And this is dangerous because here we have religious freedom at stake, but also a constant harassment and target of a part of our population to whom we say you do not belong unless...
So let me ask Benjamin that question. Do you recognise that description, constant targeting and harassment of a section of the population, French Muslims?
Well, I think it's true that the debate has shifted to a place where there's lots of confusion and it targets Islam or Muslims, and there's lots of mixes. I completely agree with Reem that the law is there and we don't need to extend the law. But there's a second question, which is on a personal basis, I would say on a philosophical basis, what the education minister said, what a lot of feminist leaders say, liberal leaders in France say, is that they don't see this as desirable. They think that in a society, this is seen as something that could be either a sign of patriarchal systems, a sign of extreme religious conservatism.
Reem, would you accept that description? There are minorities in every religious community who are, whatever you want to call it, ultra-conservative, reactionary, regressive, who liberals have a trouble dealing with.
My first question would be, who decide what is desirable or not. This constant idea that only one group of people decide for the other, we are going to free you, but on our terms. This is not liberty to me.
Wouldn't your critics say that society decides, the public decide, it's a democracy? Right now, a recent poll found that 2/3 of people in France said they would be in favour of banning the headscarf on school trips. So as much as President Macron might not agree with it, he's going against public opinion on that.
Well, what is public opinion when those polls are done right after a huge controversy, and we can see that after presidential election, etc. Let me tell you what happened on the ground. Without these mothers, there would not be any school trips. They give their time. Let me even tell you something maybe even more sad. When a Muslim woman wears a hijab, and when she cleans the toilet of the next CEO who will come and be able to work in a clean office, when a Muslim woman wearing a hijab take care of our elders, because literally nobody wants to take their jobs, nobody cares about the hijab. This is nice Layla or Fatima who bring us pastries every morning. However, as soon as this woman or the kids, second, third generation, who studied in the School of the Republic, who know their right, start to be visible, to know their right, to know the law, to love France, we tell them, hold on a second, you do not fit in our society. We are going to decide how you will fit.
But you also know that a lot of these women who have been tremendous successes of integration, as you mentioned, also sometimes the most vocal, saying that they want to push back against Salafi groups, against religious conservatives, who are actually sometimes the most hawkish on the hijab in the French conversation. That's something that doesn't really transpire sometimes outside of France, but you have a lot of secular Muslim women who say that they feel pressured, they feel threatened, that, you know, if we talk about experiences on the ground, you will also have religious leaders going to mayors asking to have separate hours in public swimming pools between men and women. You'll have a lot of young girls who don't want to sit in biology classes in schools because they feel pressure from their parents or from their brothers. You have neighborhoods where you have a form of religious conservatism that has imposed itself, and that makes it very complicated for young women and, you know, other groups such as gays, LGBTs to express themselves. And so, as you said, who decides? Once again, I do think that the law we have right now is correct, but I think it's also acceptable for people, feminists, or the education minister, people in the political debate, to say you have a right to do this, but we also have a right to say that there are certain behaviors that we consider to not be a good sign of integration.
As an outsider, you're both French, I'm not. When I look at the French debate, I think, OK, you can have interesting debates about feminism, hijab. They're happening all over the world, perhaps more intensely in France than other places. But big picture, just the other day, a guy was stopped from entering a mosque where he planned to massacre a group of Muslims. Yeah. Hate crimes are on the rise across Western Europe. When that's the context you're operating in, is it really the level of attention and coverage and political debate given to an article of clothing worn by women in a minority community? Really, should that really be the top story, or should the top story really be the racism, the far right, the possible violence that's coming from that direction? I just think there's a disproportion. Would you at least acknowledge that?
First, you know, on that attack, which is horrible, we should be able to condemn it. We should be able to be extremely forceful against religion and against religious-based hate attacks and violent attacks, but at the same time, have a conversation about integration, about, you know, all of these things that make.
No, I get that. You're saying we should be able to have a responsible, calm discussion about these important issues and be able to condemn. I'm saying that's not really happening in France. Or do you think that's actually happening? Have you achieved it in France?
I will tell you something though. In 2015, 2016, we had a string of terrorist attacks, like no other country in the West.
Yes.
And at the end, we elected a moderate, someone who actually has an inclusive and universal message on this, with 7-8% of the population that is Muslim. In the United States,
is that a fair point?
Like, you know, in the United States, you have less than 1% Muslim. You have someone who's been elected president who wants to ban them from the U.S. territory. There's a lot of progress to be made. I mean, but I still don't think we should be
Benjamin, if your argument is we're better than Trump, it's not going to go that far. But let me ask you this. Sadiq Khan, Muslim mayor of London. Could that happen in Paris anytime soon? Do you see a Muslim mayor of Paris?
Of course. Of course it could happen. We've had ministers of justice, we have key politicians.
And what do you think about a practicing Muslim mayor of Paris?
I want to believe absolutely, and I will agree with you with that, but it will get worse before it gets better. So I think it will happen. I honestly think. But
when you say get worse before, what do you mean by worse?
Oh, because elections are coming. we need to distract from actually the problem that are affecting France right now, which are social and economics problem. We have been having like protests and strike for a year now, I think, in November. And every time we have a social crisis, we also have a hijab crisis. So at some point, I think France will need to rethink what it means to be French today. And France will have two choices: to accept the fact that today it's a diverse country, open to the world, connected to the world, and integrate that into society, or be backward, keep putting aside its people, and this will play against our country.
On that note, Reem, Benjamin, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you both for joining me on the show and coming on The Arena. That's our show. Up Front will be back next week.